Arfon is the elected Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales. He has been a serving police officer for over 30 years. As a uniformed sergeant, later acting as inspector within the CID for specific responsibility for crime strategy and child protection, Arfon was responsible for implementing the findings of the Waterhouse report into institutional child abuse across North Wales care homes. He holds qualifications in policing, a master's degree in UK politics and history from Keele University, and since his retirement in 2008, it's not retirement, is it? He's kept himself busy. He's kept himself busy standing and successfully being elected as a Plaid Cymru councillor, and more recently as the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales.
Noswaith dda, diolch yn fawr iawn am y croeso. Dwi'n falch iawn o gael bod yma yn gyfeilliad, a diolch i Rhys am drefnu. Good evening to you all. My name is Arfon Jones. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales, and I'm delighted to be here this evening discussing cannabis and the effects of prohibition. As Police and Crime Commissioner, my overall role is to ensure that the police force is working effectively and efficiently. The current laws around cannabis, however, are causing unnecessary demand and taking up the time of officers who could be dealing with serious offences. It was only yesterday that I was discussing a drug education programme similar to what they have in Avon and Somerset, as part of a wider diversionary scheme for minor drug possession and looking for better outcomes for individuals than a criminal record. Before I start, I just want to clarify that I see no difference between the use of cannabis for medicinal and recreational use. As Alexis Bortel, an author and cannabis advocate from Colorado, says, in 2019 it is good to remember there is no medical marijuana and no recreational marijuana. They are different names for government control of your personal life. What you do with cannabis at home isn't the government's business, just like most other things. I'm sure many of you would agree that the war on drugs was lost many years ago. If we continue to take this prohibitive stance, we will continue to increase the profits of organised crime and drain the already dwindling resources of the police. The cannabis market wastes an estimated 1 million hours of police time each year, which is costing the taxpayer £31 million. Each case associated with cannabis is costing approximately £2,256. Without this demand, forces could focus their resources on serious offences and tackle organised crime. Forces have faced increasing budget cuts since 2010, yet the demand placed on them continues to increase. It is time that we take a pragmatic approach and look at the crimes that are causing most harm to our communities. The cost associated with cannabis is exceptionally high and it keeps on rising. So many ordinary people are criminalised every year for being found in possession of cannabis for personal use. Is it really in the public interest to spend the amount of money that we do to convict a person who is found in possession of a small quantity of cannabis for personal use? Are we making our streets safer by convicting a person who uses cannabis to ease the pain caused by their condition? Should we be prosecuting people who cause no harm to others? The government reforms of medicinal cannabis raised expectations that those who are suffering would receive cannabis legally. Our hopes have been dashed, as only a small number will benefit from medicinal cannabis, like this guidance from the Association of British Neurologists testifies, which is basically just an excuse to do nothing. With the vast majority left to continue to buy cannabis illegally and risk prosecution. Uruguay regulated cannabis in 2014, and I'm looking forward to going there in February, and 10 US states have regulated cannabis, with more recently Canada. They all did it to protect young people, prevent harm and protect public health. And believe it or not, the world hasn't caved in. In fact, cannabis regulation in Colorado has boosted the local economy, not to mention the tax return which has been invested in public housing. Personally, I think that Canada regulating cannabis is the start of the dominoes falling. I just hope the UK is not the last domino to go. Not only would the regulation of cannabis reduce the number of people with medical conditions receiving criminal records, it would also reduce the dangers associated with organised crime. Within the current market, consumers have no idea about the strength of the cannabis they're taking. There are no age restrictions to protect children, and it continues to feed the organised crime empire. Imagine walking down St Mary Street and some guy offers you a litre of clear liquid for a fiver and says it's vodka. Will you buy it? No, of course not, because vodka is legally available, so why risk your health taking an unknown substance? Well, this is what happens to recreational drug users day in, day out, and we wonder why drug users have health problems. Most of the time it has nothing to do with the substance, it's the fact that it's in the hands of criminals who cut it up with all manner of substances, injuries to health. One of the most recent examples of prohibition making matters worse was the nonsensical introduction of the new Psychoactive Substances Act in 2015. Before the Act was introduced, the so-called legal highs were available from head shops where products were monitored, controlled and tracked. Today's market is in the hands of organised criminals, and we have seen the growing dangers associated with psychoactive substances as a result. Does anyone remember seeing people affected by Mamba and Spice before passing of this Act and compounding the negative effects of prohibition? No, of course not. Legal highs were not even on the radar of most of us. Now, the knee-jerk politicians in Westminster want to reclassify psychoactive substances as a Class A drug, despite evidence that shows that punitive sentencing does not make a blind bit of difference to usage. Not all countries have a problem with synthetic cannabinoids like Mamba and Spice that we have. For example, the Netherlands and Switzerland, and that begs the question, is that down to their liberal approach to drugs? Which then begs a further question, that if the UK had taken the same approach to cannabis that the Netherlands did 40 years ago, would we have a problem with psychoactive substances that we have today? I think not. There are many myths out there about cannabis being perpetuated by people in power who should know better. They relate to strength, mental health, gateway, usage, and the most misleading of all, the one of our children. Early evidence from Colorado, published by Transform Drugs, defies critics of regulation, saying, there has been no obvious spike in young people's cannabis use, road fatalities or crime, and there have been a number of positives, including a dramatic drop in the number of people being criminalised for cannabis offences, and we've seen the figures from California. A substantial contraction in the illicit trade as the majority supply is now regulated by the government, and a significant increase in tax revenue, which is now being spent on social programmes. Consistent public support for legalisation also suggests Colorado's perceived the reforms to have been a success. So, we'll just touch briefly on some of the myths. The first one is the one around mental health, and as John has also touched upon. Whatever the impact of cannabis on mental health, and there is a great deal of contention around this, with a lack of clarity about what is caused by cannabis use as opposed to just correlating with it, the key issues is that leaving the market in the hands of criminals can only make things more risky. If those who claim cannabis use does cause mental health problems, but even a small minority of users are correct, regulating the market can help. For example, there is evidence that having a better balance of CBD and THC in cannabis can be protected. The only way to ensure the balance is through regulating the market and steering people towards less risky products. Recent research even suggests CBD might be used as an antipsychotic drug. Regulation would also allow health warnings and advice on packaging. The one most favoured by politicians, including politicians in this illustrious building, is the gateway argument. The gateway theory has been widely debunked. If cannabis use was a significant factor in causing people to use other drugs, we would not have the situation where in fact the vast majority of people who use cannabis do not go on to use other illegal drugs. Now, some people who first take cannabis then take other drugs is not proof that one caused the other. In fact, the gateway theory mistakes correlation for causation. Cannabis is more available than, say, heroin, so the sort of person who wants to take drugs is more likely to come across and taking cannabis first. That they then go on to take heroin is not caused by their cannabis use, just as people who use heroin will also come across and use alcohol first. But it does not mean that alcohol use causes heroin use. A far better correlation for who goes on to develop problematic use of heroin is adverse childhood experiences like sexual abuse or PTSD. And that is where the evidence of causal impact is strong, with people self-medicating to deal with the pain. In fact, the Dutch identified making cannabis illegal so people have to interact with criminals who may offer them other illegal drugs as a bigger problem. And to separate the cannabis market from these other drugs was why the Netherlands allowed the cannabis coffee shops to open initially. Where am I now? Sorry about this. Yeah, increased usage. That's another one that if we legalise it, there'll be more people using cannabis or any other drugs. Comparative studies of drug laws around the world show no link between harsh enforcement and lower levels of use. The theory that criminalisation has a significant deterrent effect, which underpins the policy of public prohibition, is not supported by evidence, as a range of studies have shown, including specifically about cannabis. In the Netherlands, where the possession and retail supply of cannabis is legal in practice, rates of cannabis use are almost the same as the European average. And just a quote from the government's own drug strategy, the review of the 2010-15 drug strategy, they concluded there is in general a lack of robust evidence as to whether capture and punishment serves as a deterrent for drug use. Perhaps more importantly still, levels of drug use are often equated with levels of drug harm, but the vast majority of drug use is non-problematic. Rather than narrowly focusing on reducing use, policy should seek to reduce overall harm, and legal regulation would be much better for that than leaving the cannabis market in the hands of criminals. And finally, is the point around children. We always say that children will have better access to cannabis if it was regulated, which is, as we know, rubbish. Prohibition is highly ineffective at restricting young people's access to drugs. Illegal drug dealers do not ask for ID. That is one of the key reasons why the Canadian government legalised and regulated cannabis, and that's just in Trudeau said. Effective legal regulation, which includes age restrictions, can limit young people's access to drugs. For example, evidence shows that changes in minimum legal purchasing laws can have a substantial effect on youth alcohol use and related harms. There is growing evidence that young people find it easier to buy cannabis than alcohol. We should, however, obviously do all we can to prevent young people from taking drugs. However, if minors do obtain legal drugs intended for adult use, they are at least better protected because regulated cannabis is quality controlled and can carry dosage and health and safety information. For these young people caught using drugs, criminalisation can restrict their life chances and further marginalise them. So, just to sum up, I support the regulation of cannabis because, and I'll list these, it's a naturally occurring plant which has medicinal properties and improves well-being. We should not seek to control individual choice as adults to consume substances which brings happiness and well-being to them. We should regulate to protect children and other vulnerable people. Cannabis should be regulated and taxed to improve social welfare. Cannabis should be regulated to remove stigmatisation and improve employment opportunities for those who use it. The cannabis regulation will reduce crime and violence and improve public safety. Recent evidence from the United States shows that states where cannabis regulation is in place shows a reduction in opioid prescribing and is useful in treating opioid addiction. This list is not exhaustive, but I strongly believe that the criminal justice system should be used to punish those that caused harm to others, and I don't believe that those that use cannabis recreationally or medicinally normally cause harm to others or should be punished.